Hello, and welcome to the C-Suite Chronicles podcast. We're bringing you the top voices in tech leadership. Today on the C-Suite Chronicles, we're talking about generative AI. ChatGPT is probably the first thing that comes to mind when someone says those words. But it's so much more than that. Gen AI is being used to solve complex problems in a variety of industries like biotech and healthcare. Its implications are astounding. Its future, nearly limitless. There are concerns, however, that generative AI will eventually eliminate jobs and wreak havoc on our working society as we know it. Much of this fear may be grounded in myth, but then again, it may not be entirely unfounded. One thing is for sure, generative AI will change the world as we know it, and potentially sooner than we think. I am delighted to have on the show with me today Boaz Ashkenazy and Heather Redman, both of whom are experts on AI. Boaz is founder and CEO at Seattle-based Simply Augmented, which helps companies seamlessly integrate AI to improve efficiency and productivity. He's also the host of the Shift AI podcast. Heather Redman is a venture capitalist and co-founder and managing partner of Flying Fish Partners, which invests primarily in AI. In this episode, we delve into the implications of Gen AI, its applications in emerging technologies such as blockchain and augmented reality, its implications for the workforce, and the potential for regulation in this rapidly evolving field. If you're interested in generative AI and what it means for the future, stay tuned. I'm Robin Kurdick, and this is the C-Suite Chronicles. Heather, Boaz, welcome to the C-Suite Chronicles. It's really great to have you on the show today. I'm super excited because today we're talking about generative AI. This is a topic that is dominating the headlines right now, and I can't think of two more expert folks to have on the show to talk about this. So again, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. It's nice to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, very happy to be here.
Well, before we jump into today's topic, could you take a couple of minutes and just briefly introduce yourselves and give us a little bit of history about your backgrounds? Heather, you want to kick us off?
Absolutely. I started out my life in Southern California as the child of hippies, which I always like to sort of ground everybody in that. So I love new and interesting things, and I'm always sort of searching for, what can I do next? And I think AI is certainly a good example of that. But I've had a career doing a lot of different things, including starting out life as a corporate lawyer, which I also think is a good thing for, child of hippies to do. And then, of course, ending my career now as a venture capitalist. So in between all of those things, I've spent a lot of time in technology startups in a variety of roles, not legal, but everything from strategy to product to, running operations, and left law, behind a long time ago. But for the last, I guess now 6 years, I have been one of the co-founders and managing partners of a startup venture fund that does seed stage investing exclusively in AI. So we, for some reason, largely related to my two co-founders' background, we had the foresight to think of AI as being an investable thesis before most people did, and so started a fund with a focus solely on AI before it was really a thing. And have been doing that now in the course of two funds, and certainly envision ourselves continuing to invest in that vein into the future for as long as we can certainly see at this point.
And I'm Boaz Ashkenazy. I'm also from Southern California. I grew up a college basketball player turned geek, and moved to San Francisco in the early 90s to get involved in the early days of the internet, and then moved to Seattle for graduate school, University of Washington in 2000. And I've been in Seattle ever since. After graduating, did a lot of startups, and one startup was in the virtual reality and real estate space. The other was in 3D e-commerce space. And then I was approached by Facebook at the time to join the company, and I spent a few years there during the name change, and so ended up working there in the enterprise engineering space and building productivity tools for employees. And around last year, I had some engineers approach me and get pretty excited about what was happening in the AI space. They happened to be experts in machine learning and AI, and we broke off this last spring to start an AI first agency called Simply Augmented, and we're going to market. We're excited about what's happening in the marketplace, and couldn't be more thrilled to be on.
I'd like to think at this point that unless you've been living under a rock, most people know what AI and generative AI are, and particularly in our listenership, which is made up primarily of tech leaders. But just to level set, I was wondering if you could just start out by giving us sort of a lay of the land. What is generative AI?
Yeah, there are, the super long versions or the super short versions, of course, but maybe I'll do a little compare and contrast here because I think most folks that are listening probably want to talk more about use cases than anything else. But the way I usually think about it is that generative AI is very useful if you want to either create new content, and that can be really any kind of content. We'll probably get into some of the kinds of content that are maybe a little bit more off the beaten path when we get a little further into this discussion. But new sorts of things, and we're all very familiar with the poems and the things like that were first popularized when ChatGPT came out, and everyone was writing poems and toasts at weddings and that sort of thing. But you can create all sorts of new content, and then also there's a very useful function that it provides on sort of the other side of the coin, which is summarizing content and taking a lot of content that's out there and making it intelligible at the level that's appropriate for the circumstance. And that is proving very valuable in a lot of different use case scenarios, whether that's medical records or educational contexts or research contexts of various sorts. So those are two, very sort of pithy areas for generative. And the other area that I like to contrast it with is reinforcement learning, which is an area that you might think of as being a place where you might want AI to do something for you. So kind of replace how a human might run say a manufacturing process, and instead you might want an AI to gradually learn the best way to operate that machine instead of the human. And so that's a place where you might use a different kind of AI, in this case, reinforcement learning. And of course, that gets a lot more complex because, we actually use reinforcement learning to make generative AI better, even in those garden variety contexts that I mentioned. Generative could be very useful in. So there's a lot of overlap between all the various kinds of AI, but that's a good way to maybe think about generative in contrast to some of the other really important areas of AI that we are seeing deployed regularly in the business context today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great description, and I would add that some of the projects that we're working on where data can be mined and unstructured data can be mined, and the large language models can understand that data in ways that were just not possible a couple of years ago, and then generate responses and insights that feel like a human is giving those insights, like a research assistant would. And that's super powerful. I would also say that the idea of having an assistant now, an AI assistant, is different than what it was like before, just because the responses feel a lot more natural. And it would be impossible to do that without large language models and generative AI. And so I think that's why this year has been so exciting, because there's some things that were just not possible. And it's not that machine learning hasn't been around for a long time. It's just that this kind of generative AI is just so different than what we've been used to.
Yeah, and it's getting so much attention. And you mentioned ChatGPT, which I think that's the first thing that comes to mind. It came out last year, and it's just created a ton of hype about generative AI. I have been told by various people that they think that ChatGPT is kind of an elementary application of the true power, really what Gen AI can do. and that it stretches beyond large language models. I've heard that it can be used to cure diseases or other things. Can you talk a little bit about what are some of the upside implications of generative AI for different industries, say healthcare, logistics planning, those kinds of spaces?
I'll jump in really quick. I mean, I think that prototyping in general, but prototyping for those industries in particular is pretty exciting. Being able to run simulations really, really quickly and at scale, whether it's around drugs or around the way that people move through space or different kinds of prototyping, around how people, understand these models is powerful. And it allows us to get to solutions that we may not have thought of before because of some of these simulations. And I would also say that chat interface is just one way to understand the power of LLM. It just happened to be the one that OpenAI chose to show all of us the power, but there's a lot of ways that you can harness the power of these models, and sometimes it's just a dashboard to show you, kind of what to expect from a sales forecast. And so it doesn't always need to be talking to your agent for it to give you results that are meaningful and insightful.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And obviously the Copilot for whatever, we are looking right now at a Copilot for chip design, for example, that is going to potentially, revolutionize the ability to design chips that are highly specialized for specific applications, which, we're all living in this GPU rich, GPU poor environment right now, and allowing people to, take sort of control of their own destiny and design their own chips could be potentially, it'll take a while for us to get there, but could potentially really change that calculus. And certainly speeding the development of chip design could be pretty important as we, sort of head into this AI future. But we have a couple of investments already in our portfolio that are good examples of that landscape. We've got one in the small molecule drug discovery space, which is a company called Variational that is specifically targeted at providing sort of that bridge between AI and the existing biopharmaceutical industry, because there's just, a lot of silos right now. When you think about sort of established industries and then you think about AI, there are a lot of places where those two worlds just haven't completely matched up yet. And so there's a budding AI sort of services field where you've got AI companies that are standing up platforms that are going to then be providing services to the biopharmaceutical industry and saying, hey, we can speed your drug discovery process by basically allowing you to take our platform, use your basically your target product profile as the prompt that you feed into our foundation model, which has been trained on molecular data, not language data, and may have a mixture of proprietary data and publicly available data. And you will be using your prompt to find new potential drug targets to then take into your wet lab and test. And I think their last estimate, there were about 24 of these companies, along with them, operating in this sector now, and they'd already produced twice as many preclinical drug targets that have acknowledged potential as the rest of the biopharmaceutical industry operating traditionally has. So pretty exciting data, early still, because as I say, this is still beginnings of a field, but that's the kind of thing that we're beginning to see. And we see the same thing in material science, foundation models that are specifically being built around particular areas of material science, which are, again, molecules, right? But different sets of molecules. And so different sets of training data for different sets of molecules that are also built as a new foundation model for that particular targeted space. And that's, still this area of generative, but quite different than what we've been playing around with, making cool haikus, right? And potentially quite transformative.
Yeah, I second what Heather says. I think we may look back on this time and the frenzy that happened this year and the bio advancements that are made through these generative AI foundational models, maybe the thing that's the most impactful as we look back.
Mm-hmm. Let's
That's
hope so.
Those are some really interesting and incredible real world applications. What about, where does AI intersect with emerging technologies like augmented reality or blockchain or some of those other technologies? Quantum computing is another one that comes to mind.
I'd love to hear Boaz on augmented reality, because clearly he's a lot to say there that I have no clue about. I barely work on those things, much less know much about the business.
Well, I'm trying to think about the ways that all three of those things could intersect, which actually is kind of interesting. I mean, the quantum computing side, the efficiency and the speed by which things can be calculated are really the piece that I think about. And how that relates to 3D is, this year it's been a lot about text, and there's been excitement around stability and other ways of going from text to images and generating a lot of imagery. The thing that people are still trying to figure out in a meaningful way is the way that we can go from text to 3D models. Like an example of that would be, let's say that you needed to generate a 3D model of a scene or an environment, whether it was a background for doing, a virtual video, or it was a game or any kind of environment, or a product itself in 3D. Historically, that's been really, really time intensive, labor intensive to build those scenes. And there's this promise that we'll be able to use AI to generate 3D quickly in a meaningful way. And I think that's really exciting for a lot of people. We're already starting to see it a little bit in gaming, where elements in the environment like trees or, roads or, just different environmental objects, which, are part of those scenes, but can be time consuming to create. Now those are just getting created with AI and dropped into scenes. We're starting to see that with background people as well. Super exciting. I think on the blockchain side, this is going to play out, but right now, NFTs are kind of a bad word, but I still think blockchain technology is going to have a big part to play in AI and also in AR, because with all the deep faking that's happening, we're going to need to authenticate the truth in some ways, and having that on chain and on a ledger is going to be the beginning of how we recognize, is this object real? Is this video real? And so I think there's some potential crossover between those two.
Yeah, I think we had a startup that was a successful exit for us in our early days as a firm called Stream, and it was very very elemental in terms of how AI and AR were interacting. But they basically were using AR to help you get things repaired in your home, and AI was the computer vision that allowed you to identify what in the heck you were looking at, right? And we're seeing a lot of that, obviously, with just sort of bringing expertise into the home and just allowing you to not roll trucks all the time to do whatever needs to be done. And AI provides just a lot of intelligence there, and certainly you're seeing that with some of the housewares that are trying to get placed in your home and allowing you to do more experimentation. But that's all very elemental. I think what Boaz said about gaming is where we're seeing a lot of the early action that will then, of course, as with many things in gaming, migrate over into other fields. And I think a lot about the actors and writers strike right now, and some of the fears that they have about AI. And I'm like, wow, dudes, you have no idea what's going on in gaming, or if you do, you should be really worried, because what's going on there with character creation. Boaz mentioned the stuff that's going on with some of the non-player characters. We have a startup in that area called Agency, and they're just beginning to come onto the field. But the work that you can do to make those games so much more interesting by creating autonomous non-player characters in the game using AI, then to say nothing of the bushes and the trees, but the
Absolutely.
characters, running around, you start to think about that migrating into the rest of entertainment, and it gets very, very interesting. And of course, that will all be in the AR context before we know it. So I think there's a lot to happen there. And then on blockchain, I have a little bit of a theory back to that sort of generative's power to drive everything into sort of this Copilot / assistant mode. We used to have this scarcity of sort of software talent, and so we were all struggling to get engineers to turn sort of our ideas about product into software and make them real. And as we see the cost of producing software get driven down, and I can't tell you how many pitches we see by great software engineers every week where they are literally convinced that their job is going away in the next 2 years because of generative. Yeah. And so they are bringing us a pitch for how they can accelerate that so that they have a different job, which is running a company that accelerates the demise of their job. But if that is true and the cost of making software is going to be driven down, I think that means that the value of hardware, which is that GPU rich, GPU poor idea that we're seeing right now, I think that means the value of hardware is going to relatively go up for at least a time period. And then I think the other thing that is going to become more valuable, and we're already seeing this because everybody has a lot of anxiety about the availability of new and novel data because we're running out of the internet, believe it or not, to train generative. And so there's a lot of interest in who's got new and novel data, and do we run out of data to keep refining these models? And so there's an interest both in proprietary data, but also in just new data. And so I think blockchain may have an interesting role in just, sort of identifying, hey, this is my data and it has value, and therefore I want to safeguard it in some way and identify it as mine. And so that sort of nirvana that we've all been waiting for of I have value as a consumer may be coming at some point, just in terms of my value as a training unit, if nothing else, because we as humans run around creating new and novel data all the time just by existing. So that's one, thing I can see in terms of blockchain and the interaction of AI and blockchain. And then quantum, I know, sort of like a fingernail's worth about quantum, but from what I understand of it, the way that it works is sort of not only very likely to help make AI more efficient, which we need, because obviously we've got this whole climate and energy transition thing that we're dealing with on the other side of our equation here. But the way in which it works is much more consistent with the way sort of, obviously quantum physics works and the way that sort of deep biological and molecular systems work. But it may actually lend itself to figuring out some of these deeper material science and complex biological systems problems can be solved. And so we're really interested in some of the bigger AI problems in that area. And so if quantum techniques and then potentially ultimately quantum computing can help sort of unlock some of that, I think that may help us with, advancing some of that drug discovery work, but also some of the material science work that we ultimately are going to need to do in order to get through this energy transition. Because we have some like miracles that need to occur in terms of material science in order to get to the other side of the energy transition.
Hey, Robin, there's one other thing that when Heather was speaking, it made me think of related to AR. When I was at Meta, we did a lot of work with the Quest Pro, and obviously in June, when Apple came out with the announcement of their headset, we're going to be seeing exactly how that plays out starting in January. We're recording now in the first week of September, and yesterday there was some announcements about a new chip for iPhones and for Apple Watches. And the chips actually are really, really powerful. And a lot of people are thinking that even though artificial intelligence and AI was not mentioned at all in their announcement yesterday. They're not saying those words. Because of that chip and what's happening there, we think that a lot of the AI for Apple devices may happen on device. And why that's important is a lot of what we're doing now with AI is happening in the cloud. But if you can put it on device, it'll be able to deal with what Apple probably really wants is privacy. And also it'll allow what Heather has said, which is that humans will be now training the AI on their personal devices on device, which I think is going to have really different implications for how these models are trained. It's just be very different than the way that we're doing it now, but exciting if you can get the power onto those devices, which is the trick.
Yeah, for sure. I've seen that. I've seen ads for that thing and it looks unbelievable. I mean, it's just amazing what it can do. The gaming capability is incredible. I wanted to return to the jobs topic for a moment. There's a lot of talk that AI is going to take all the jobs. Do you think that panic is justified? Are there certain markets that it may affect more than others, or certain types of jobs? Could it eliminate some jobs and then create jobs in other areas?
I have a very optimistic view of this. I'm a little biased because we do a lot of work for companies, helping them understand how AI is going to fit into their companies. But this is the way that I think about it. I think that employees spend a lot of time doing things that sap their energy and aren't really being focused on the things in the business that move the needle. And so when I think about how I can help with that, I think agents and AI can really decrease a lot of that 80% and focus them on the 20% that is creative and that is also driving growth and driving scale. And I think if humans and machines can come together to understand that, you're going to see growth in these businesses, not eliminating people to, make the P&L look better, but instead kind of eliminating some of those things that are monotonous and pushing people into spending their energy on the things that they love and the things that are growing the business. Will jobs get lost? Yes, I think they will. But I also think that we're in for a lot of productivity within organizations. And so I'm a lot more optimistic than the media is about the way that this is going to affect the job market.
I am in a very much I don't know phase. I think that the new twist here is that it's intellectual labor that is going to be replaced at a faster rate than we've ever seen before. And I do agree that it's going to start with the drudgery part of intellectual labor, but it's still intellectual labor, and we don't yet know if humans can do just the good stuff, whether our brains even work that way. I don't know. I remember being in law school and really wanting to clean my bathroom. So there may be a thing where we have to do the crap work in order to relax or something. I don't know. We just don't know because we haven't done this before. And of course, it's the highly structured but highly intellectual professions that are most at risk, like coding, like law, like accounting. And what we've had before is sort of the jobs that we could move into were jobs that you could upskill into. And now it's a different kind of job that maybe we have to recruit, have to create newly. And we don't really know what those jobs are yet because we're creating something that will have intellectual capacity in terms of just productivity capacity that's much greater than ours. So it's and getting greater than ours. We're going to have some other things. Maybe we don't quite understand what those things are yet, but it is a very confusing environment and changing very rapidly. So I think it's a big unknown. But I agree that in terms of productivity unlock, huge. There may be a real blossoming of productivity, and then there may be some sort of a shock too. Well, I just don't know, because our sense of ourselves as being the smartest thing in the room is in for a real shock, I think, in some number of years, which I think is quite a bit less than 10. And so what does that mean, and how do we deal with that as humans?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think the legal example is a good one. we may be seeing a huge influx in people thinking about ethics and AI in the legal community as a lot of the paralegal type of work and the research work goes away. It's just hard to know, is there going to be balance in the way that that shift occurs?
So moving sort of to the political arena, the Biden administration recently announced this voluntary AI policy framework. And I guess some of the largest technology companies have agreed to this, and states, such as Washington, are considering regulations as well. What do you think about that? And how do you think that government should approach the regulation of AI?
I am pro-regulation. I think it's absolutely necessary. I think it needs to be international. My personal dream, I think I probably have actually had this at night before, is that Brad Smith will leave Microsoft and get on this as an international effort. I think he's the man for the job, and we need someone to do it. The models that are talked about, Basel 2 and 3 are an analogy that some are looking to, but this is a much bigger set of issues. Nuclear non-proliferation treaty and the associated regulatory bodies are another, but again, very different situation, and these models are much cheaper to build than a bomb. So it's there are a whole lot of approaches that are being talked about, but it's a huge problem. The other thing that I think we just have to be cognizant of is that if AIs become as intelligent as we think they will be, they are not really necessarily at some point susceptible of being regulated in the way that we want them to be, because they will be more than capable of orchestrating regulatory capture in the same way that any industry is. They will be able to figure out a strategy for that as well. So it's a very thorny problem, but we need to get on it immediately and think about it carefully, as soon as possible. That said, I am not of the school of we need to stop doing AI. I don't think that's feasible. And we, as I mentioned before, we need it in order to solve some of the really critical problems that we have around the energy transition. And without it, I don't think we can get where we need to get on that front.
I agree with Heather on that. One thing I'll add is, I didn't mention this at the beginning, but I'm the host of a podcast as well called Shift AI. And we recently had Ora Nezioni on the show talking about his private meeting with Biden, which was really interesting. And one of the things that came up, they talked about moonshots and big projects and stuff related to healthcare and cancer, but they also talked about election interference around the world. And I think that's something that's going to come up, because especially in countries where elections are really close, like in our country, and there's other countries in Eastern Europe and in Europe that are also very close. And the potential for creating disruptions within the election cycle to alter those elections, I think, is very high. And so I think that's one of the things that a lot of people are thinking about, how to deal with that. And it's real, and we're going to be experiencing an election cycle here pretty soon. And so I think it's something to take a look at, and that politicians should be concerned about.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much both for your time today. This was a really interesting conversation. I certainly learned a lot, and I think our listeners are really going to enjoy hearing what you had to say about generative AI. So thanks for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you. Great to see you both.
Thank you, Robin. Yeah, good to see you guys too. I appreciate the conversation.
If you liked what you heard on today's podcast, please subscribe on Apple or Spotify and leave us a review letting us know what you think. And please share this content with your peers on your social media channels and in other ways that it'll reach as many people as possible. Our goal is to help more founders achieve success more quickly, and the best way to do that is by sharing our collective knowledge. A rising tide lifts all boats, and the more the WTIA tech community can help and support one another, the better.